have the potted version of what Castle Rock is about between the... Also, would you mind, for those of us who are recording it, just identifying yourself by name so when we're transcribing this stuff we could tell you apart?
Yeah, totally. So I'm Sam Shaw, and I'm the one who sounds slightly whiny on the recording.
And I'm Dustin Thomason, and we are the executive producers and co-creators of Castle Rock.
And it is true, I'm sorry, that we've been indoctrinated now into the bad robot code of silence, where it's basically like NSA level, secrecy. But we will try to violate that code as much as we can today.
Well, we want to hear what the show's about.
Oh, okay,
Yes. Okay, so first of all, I was to say that we're both huge, lifelong Stephen King fans. We were both fiction writers before we became TV writers, and I think Stephen King was sort of like the gateway drug that moved us from comic books and etc. into adult fiction and literature, and we worked together a lot over the years. But we talked a lot about Stephen King and about and particularly about the town of Castle Rock over the years while working on other projects. The last show that I created, that Dusty worked on, is a show called Manhattan. It was about the development of the atomic bomb at Los Alamos, and so sense of place was really important in that show. It was about a very weird small town, and so we spent a lot of time talking about Castle Rock, which is a very weird small town. So the sort of gestation of this whole thing was that after having talked for many, many years about this setting and this place, and part of what we loved about Stephen King is that there are all of these kind of surprising interconnections and Easter eggs and setups and payoffs and crossover characters and that sort of thing that exist within Stephen King's library. We felt like it would be really exciting to set a show in this town and to use it as an opportunity to kind of explore and interpret the Stephen King library for TV in a slightly different way. Just say, not take one book and sort of retell The Shining for television, but to try to adapt Stephen King almost as a genre unto himself, because he really, he's one of those writers, first of all, he's so insanely prolific, that you can do that, but he also, there are themes and ideas that sort of recur, he's like a writer who really returns to the scene of the crime. So the idea from the start was set a show in this town that is basically like the worst luck town in the world. I mean, it's been visited by, 2 serial killers and the homicidal rabid dog and the demonic truck, and the devil hung out there for a little while, and there are a handful of haunted houses, and you sort of think who the fuck has stayed in this town? Why does the town still exist? And that was a really provocative question to us too, and seemed interesting. So the show is an anthology show. Every season will be a new story that's set in this town that is sort of like this archaeological site where there are horrors and nightmares and stories behind every door, and there's a sort of central kind of uncanny horror mystery story that plays out over the course of this first season. We can tell you a little bit about, but it sort of becomes an avenue to explore this kind of Levitt town of horror and to try to interpret this Stephen King kind of aesthetic on TV in a way that we hope kind of harkens back to De Palma and Cronenberg and Kubrick, and that kind of heyday of great filmmakers doing a kind of adult psychological horror fare that is based on Stephen King's books.
That's pretty good.
So you mentioned connections, and yeah, Stephen King has tons in a huge universe. What was the process of gathering those connections, to write the story? Do you guys have a huge story Bible, or?
That's a great question. I think part of it is as fans and as readers of it, we've been kind of mentally amassing it for quite a while. But there are actually some, we actually have seen and looked at some amazing maps that literally detail every interconnection between the books and among the books. And I think part of it is, and that was something that I think really excited both of us from the beginning, was this idea of in ways small and large, he has been sort of referencing all of these other books within his own books, and you're sort of starting to slowly amass this understanding that this character knew this character, or this character lived down the street from this one, or they just
you're
barely
reading
missed
Misery,
each other.
And there's a reference to a fire at a hotel, and and so the Overlook sort of wends its way through, and there's just sort of something very exciting about that sense that all of these characters inhabit the same universe.
Yeah, and I think too that part of the reason that we this sort of one iconic Stephen King character that kind of intersects with our original characters in this first season is Alan Pangborn, who was sort of the legendary sheriff of Castle Rock over the course of several of the big Castle Rock books. And so I think that sort of excited us, was to begin to use characters like Pangborn as a kind of intersectionality between those books.
and then the sort of original character. So this season tells sort of an original story that I think readers of Stephen King will find that there are a lot of kind of tropes and kind of character relationships. You know, there are a lot of adults haunted by a trauma of childhood, and a lot of stories about, you know, prisons and crime and punishment and the nature of evil. And so we're really excited to show this first teaser today, and something that is revealed in the teaser is that Shawshank Prison plays a really huge, sort of significant role in this first season. And so, and that was a cool thing for us too. I mean, as fans of Stephen King and of the movie and of the novella that it's based on, the ability to type, you know, interior Shawshank Prison day is pretty fucking cool.
And also to imagine what Shawshank would look like now. The idea of,
Yeah,
that was sort of part of the original conceit of the show, was that we were going to set this first season in contemporary America so that we could really embrace this question of what is Castle Rock after having been visited on, all these horrors having been visited on it, and what does a place like Shawshank look like in 2017?
Following up, if you don't mind following up on that, the interconnectedness in the process of putting together your map for the show. Was there a connection you didn't see coming that you had discovered new? I know you had talked about this for some time. And is there a connection you think viewers who are King fans are going to be very surprised that they see this season?
I mean, I hope that I hope there will be a lot of surprises for fans and for viewers that are kind of spring-loaded into the storytelling. And I will say that, like, we are Stephen King geeks, and we hope that we will reward the interest of Stephen King geeks. Now, at the same time, like, we want to tell a story that will be exciting to to somebody who's not necessarily like a deep fan of the genre, in the same way that, like, I'm not a big fantasy guy, and Game of Thrones made a fantasy guy out of me, and it was just like, it just captured me immediately, and so part of the hope was to tell a story that that is seeded with Easter eggs and crossovers and surprises that I think will reward the most encyclopedic, PhD level Stephen King super wonk, and also there are some surprise guest appearances and some turns in the storytelling that I think anybody who's just seen a couple of the classic movies will also feel excited about too. That's a really evasive answer. I'm sorry. Forgive me. I know how. But
I tried that. I tried. So, what input or advice did Stephen King give you in approaching the show?
He's been a really amazing collaborator. He, I think, first when we came to the show, we sort of came to JJ and then to Stephen all together to say, we want to play in your universe. And I think we were incredibly surprised, and now sort of knowing a little more about who Stephen King is, I guess I should be less surprised, but that he was so willing to let us expand upon what he had done, to use these characters to every time we've asked him, can we do this thing to one of your iconic characters, he always says yes. And I think it's because he really believes that he wants these characters to kind of find new life as well. And it's been really great to kind of be able to talk to him about these characters that we all know and love, and feel like he really has our back in terms of how we use them in hopefully original ways.
Yeah, and we felt, I mean, too, it's like you think about, we've come to a point in this culture where it's sort of comic books have almost become our Shakespeare, how many times on screen has the death of Bruce Wayne's parents been enacted? How many times have we seen it and reimagined it and reinterpreted it to reflect the times? And I think the same is true of Stephen King in a way. So many of us read those books as adolescents and were fucking scared out of our wits, and maybe it's because they scarred us that they sort of hold this purchase on our imagination, but it felt like it was a really exciting challenge and opportunity to try to re-engage with that material now in 2017, in the age of terror, in a moment when so much of our kind of national identity crisis is caught up in questions about what scares us and what we do when we're afraid and whether we behave rationally or irrationally and what we do to feel safe at night. So that was sort of it was really fun to kind of dig into the material in a kind of contemporary way.
I know this sounds like inside baseball, but did you guys literally sit down sort of in the early stages and just start going through the books and see what you could use or what you could toss out? Like what wouldn't fit? Like, oh, look, Dick Halloran is in It. Oh, yeah, but that's Derry. That's not Castle Rock. Was there like a lot of that discussions of what goes in the pile we can use and what can't?
Well, there totally was, and there still is actually. It's been like an ongoing process, and part of it was like, part of what was fun about working on the show is it was almost like the best book group you've ever been in, because we were all reading, like we all returned to the books, we all revisited them, we would assign homework, different people would return to different books, and we'd come in and we'd talk about something we'd forgotten, the one thing, the hope is we'll get to keep kind of playing in this sandbox for a while, so that we haven't felt the need to kitchen sink and bite everything off in this first season, But it was really interesting to find these themes and ideas that recur throughout the book, besides even just crossover characters, that there are these sort of, so prison, as we said, is really is a setting that's really important to this season. And when you return to, from Shawshank to Green Mile to some of the story, there are these ideas about justice and how we assign blame and how we define what a monster is in our legal system that he's been working out and kind of poring over for decades. And so it was really fun to try to read that material deeply and try to understand kind of what it means to him and what it could mean to us in the show.
We were told that there's a mystery looping through the first season. How does that speak to the horror of the show? Is it more of a creeper? Are there visceral elements that can be shocking moments? What sort of horror are we looking at? Is it like PG-13 or straight up horror?
Well, I think that, for us, where we really come to this as fans of horror, we I think, really love sort of psychological horror. And so, fundamentally, everything that we're doing in this season, the mystery, the deepening of each of these characters, is all connected to the idea of that when you put a character in peril who you really care about and you understand, that's where the real horror comes from. And I think, for us, that's really where it started. And all of the horrors that are in this season of Castle Rock are really, we hope, offshoots of those characters. There are, of course, thrills and jump scares and things that you want, but we really start from the place of who are these people and what are they afraid of.
Yeah, but I would say, like, in a way, like, when I look at Shining and The Dead Zone too, although it's sort of it is more of a mind bender than a horror story in some ways, but like there are some harrowing moments in that movie. The whole sort of episode involving Frank Dodd, the Castle Rock Strangler, which is history that obviously hangs over the story that we're telling here. But The Shining too. I mean, there are a lot of really terrifying moments that consist of like a father looking at a son in a hotel room, and then there are also hacked up bodies in a hallway. And so I hope that we'll be able to unsettle and disturb and provoke audiences in a whole variety of ways.
You guys, that's all we have time for. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you guys so much.
Appreciate it.